And so we have some folks here today that are going to share their thoughts about the scale of the work, about the durability, another word that we heard over and over again, both yesterday and today. And we're going to hear about some case studies and some examples that will give us some creative ideas flowing and some hope that the conservation finance tools that we can bring to bear make sure that we are able to meet not only our biodiversity goals, but the goals that have been shared, our relationship goals, our connectivity goals, and the work that really brings us all and connects us together over the next few years. So we'll have some different perspectives. You will recognize this next person who is going to moderate this session from last night's extraordinary reception at the museum. And so please help me welcome and give him a big round of applause and thanks for a great event last night, the Executive Director, Andrew Day.
Please come join me on stage. Okay, so we're going to have a great and dynamic conversation about money. I know you guys love talking about money. Money is just so exciting. What's cool about this conversation is we could call it like beyond philanthropy. So we're going to look at new ways that finance or financial mechanisms are being brought to bear to help sustain, restore, and conserve the beautiful diversity of life on this planet, including cultures and languages and local communities. I have with me Kim Nairn, who is the founder of the Manitoulin Climate Collaborative and has a very interesting, wonderful background that you'll hear about. María José González, who is the Executive Director at Marfund, and Nitah, who is the Managing Director in Canada for Nature for Justice. I'm going to sit down, and we're going to start chatting. Hello. Great. Kim, I'm going to start with you and ask you where you're from.
More holistically?
Where were you born? Where were you raised?
Right. I think it's always really important to me, anyways, to start conversations like this in my grandfather's language. Kim Nindijnikas Pelche Nindodum Nindonjaba Anishinaabe Métis. What I just said is my name is Kim Neale, and I'm a Pelche from the Nipissing First Nation, and we're Anishinaabe. One of my grandmothers is also Métis, but I'm also a mixed French ancestry. And I often come to these conversations about conservation finance and get tapped on the shoulder for it because, I am also an environmental engineer and economist and have spent the bulk of my career in the finance industry. And to the Americans in the room, or my friends from Mexico, on Bay Street which is what we would call like the Wall Street of Canada, working for some of Canada's largest insurers and financial institutions, underwriting some of Canada's first green bonds and carbon offset projects and parametric insurance. I was also, really early on in my career, like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, involved in a lot of the public-private partnership schemes that really started to change the way Canada started blending finance, public finance and private sector finance here in Canada. And so when I moved to the Manitoulin Island, though, because I felt like that world almost killed me. And Manitoulin Island changed my whole life. It allowed me to reconnect with my own ancestry. It allowed me this time and the space to begin rethinking and relearning everything that I had learned as a financial expert. And I have elders and youth, particularly Theodore Flamand from Wikwamakwang First Nation, and Elder Albert Marshall from Mi'kmaq First Nation, and Tuatha Singh, and I feel like you'll hear me interweave quite a lot of Indigenous knowledge now, and that has changed my whole perspective on economics and regenerative economics, and so that's why the name of my company is also the Manitoulin Climate Collaborative, because while I support many First Nations on Manitoulin Island in realizing their visions for a regenerative economy on the world's largest freshwater island, I also believe that regenerative approach to economics can be applied in many, many places. And so I like to bring that place-based approach to regenerative economics, but also, my own perspective and reconnection to cultural knowledge and traditional knowledge, because I think both are needed to reimagine this whole situation.
Great, and what a fascinating blend of backgrounds. I'm glad that Bay Street did not kill you.
I made it.
And I'm sure that I look forward to hearing how you've taken that experience and blended it with all your experiences. María José, where are you from?
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, and good afternoon. It's great to be here. It's been a great morning. I was born in Guatemala, so I'm Guatemalan, from a Guatemalan father and Spanish mother. I live in Colombia, and I work for the Mesoamerican Reef Fund. I am a biologist, but I've been working in environmental funds for over, I think, 25 years. And the MAR Fund is an environmental fund, like a second-level organization. MAR Fund...
What does that mean, second level?
That we do not... We raise funds and then we allocate funding. We generally do not carry out the conservation activities directly. We facilitate the regional funding, we foster partnerships, we drive capacity building for the conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the Mesoamerican reef. So this fund is focused on this ecoregion shared by Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. And this is the largest reef system in the Atlantic Ocean and the largest transboundary reef. MAR Fund operates through granting, but in the past 2 years, we have been involved in an initiative called MAR Positive Invest, through which we're trying to develop a blue regenerative economy in the Mesoamerican reef. So we're starting in that place.
Hey, that's very cool. Thank you for coming all that distance from Colombia. I know it's not a easy, quick route up here, so thank you. Stephen, Nitah, tell me a bit about where you're from. Actually, if you're willing to share your Indigenous name, that would be cool, because it's such a cool name and a cool meaning.
Good morning, good afternoon. I'd like to start by thanking the Salazar Center for inviting me and hosting this gathering here in Canada. I think it's been an excellent 2 days of discussions, of sharing, and of seeing potential. My Dene name is Satlul. All the men in my family are called Satlul. Satlul is a person back in the day who had strong medicine power. And Satlul in my language is sun rope. And they say the reason why he was called Satlul is because he was able to climb that sun rope. And that was in the day when people were able to communicate with all species in a language they all understood each other. And where I come from, the Dene, the Northwest Territories, have very strong ties to their history, to their language, to their spirituality, to the concept of medicine power, and to represent that in responsibility is still alive and well today. I'm a managing director for Nature for Justice. Nature for Justice is a social justice NGO. It's not an environmental NGO. It's It's a global NGO. It's new. It started in 2022, supporting communities on the front line of climate change. As managing director for Canada, I focus our energies supporting Indigenous-led conservation. And to that, we've created the first 30 by 30 Canada, which is to utilize the existing financing available for conservation, but focus on introducing nature-based solution financing, such as carbon offsets, biodiversity, nature stewardship credits, and how to create those markets. You know, this week, or yesterday and today, we heard power. We need power. Safety. We need commitments. Indigenous people the world over are the best caretakers of nature. That's proven. It's no different in Canada. Power is right there. They're place-based peoples. We are place-based peoples. We've had a relationship with our territories for thousands of years. You can't get a stronger relationship than that. They're paying with their lives, their health, their liberty in exercising those responsibilities. That's commitment. You know, in Canada, I attended a conservation conference in 2015 in Canmore. There's 5 of us Indigenous peoples in that room. And the organizers were ecstatic. There's 5 of us in there. 3 of them work for provincial or national park systems. So there's only 2 of us that were not employed. And I thought to myself, this is terrible. You know, where are the Indigenous peoples? And someone said, you know, conservation community was a arrow tip or the tip of a spear of colonialism. That's our history in Canada and history of conservation. National parks were created and Indigenous people were pushed out of there at a gunpoint. As they're walking away, forced to move into areas that they're unfamiliar with, their homes were being burnt. That's the history of conservation in Canada. So in 2017, I was asked to participate in a committee that we named the Indigenous Circle of Experts at the end of the day. When Canada committed to implementing the Aichi Accord, protecting 17%. So the committee was made up of 11 of us Indigenous practitioners working for our nations in conservation, along with 9 bureaucrats working for provincial, federal, territorial governments in their environment or conservation division. In 1 year, we went across the country, had 4 regional gatherings and 2 national gatherings, meeting with Indigenous leaders, peoples, and communities. Asked a simple question. Canada is committed to protecting 17% as part of an international commitment to address climate change and biodiversity loss. What type of relationship would you like to have with Crown governments to utilize some of your territories to go towards that accounting? And we produced a report that we titled We Rise Together. In it, there's 28 recommendations. And today, if you go to an environment conference or conservation conference, there's more than 5 Indigenous people in the room. Transformation has happened in Canada already. We're asking for transformation. Indigenous communities and governments across the country have declared over 85 to 100 Indigenous protected and conserved areas from coast to coast to coast. That's going to get us near 30%, which is the new target based on the Command Montreal framework. Now that's transformational change. And we do need transformational change. We do need action sooner than later. I know philanthropists, those that have money that you've put aside because you have it or you've collected as part of your organization to support conservation, well, don't sit on it. Invest it. Give it to those that have put their lives on the lines to protect their territories. They've demonstrated commitment. They've demonstrated power. They've demonstrated longevity. They need our help. The land needs our help. In Canada, the 30% represents 3 million square kilometers, roughly. We're at roughly 14%. The remaining 1.6 million square kilometers is a quantum of land the size of Manitoba and Saskatchewan combined, if you want to have a visual look. We're halfway there already through the Indigenous leadership that's already demonstrated. And if one organization puts out an RFP saying, send us a proposal if you want to protect biodiversity. I sat on an advisory body for one such organization. Over 85 proposals, great proposals. Large protected areas that holds large quantums of carbon sink capacity, healthy biodiversity, ecosystems that are functioning. In some places, ecosystems that need restoration. But these places are what's given us the chance today to achieve what we need to achieve technologically. But we're not invested in those places. It's burning, it's flooding. That's the impacts of climate change right now, while we're talking about best practices, what's safe, what's transformational. We need action now. We need to support leadership that's been demonstrated. In Canada, leadership has been demonstrated in the conservation side. If you achieve that conservation, every Indigenous community in this country has an opportunity to protect their special places. If that happens, then there's more certainty for investors to go after the raw materials for the technology aspects of solutions to climate change. Because Canada has those raw materials, those raw resources within Indigenous and treaty lands right now. But it's the cart before the horse. My nation, we protected 26,000 square kilometers of the heart of our homeland. My community is open to meeting with exploration and developers because they're comfortable knowing that their special place is protected. And they're willing to work with others to address the other requirements. So, the first 30 by 30 program is designed to support nations to do the data collection and make sense of the data so that the land itself can pay for its management through its biodiversity credit system, through its carbon projects and carbon sequestration projects if it qualifies, or introducing new markets like nature stewardship. We're talking at scale here, people. That's the only way we could get to at scale.
Hey, Stephen, I want to hear more about those nature stewardship credits. I also want to hear from these two with their time. I know you're super passionate about this. Thanks for that. María José, you have been involved in working with fishermen on the reefs in that incredible transboundary reef system. So how are you bringing alternate philanthropy in to help conserve and sustain and restore life in those reef systems?
Okay, so we're looking at different mechanisms of financing to support, let's say, fishermen, right? And the environmental services that these fishermen live from. And we do this in two ways. Well, of course, we provide granting, but we're trying to look for alternate measures. One of the ways we're working is through parametric insurance for coral reefs, for example.
What's parametric?
I think you're better able to explain that, but it's an insurance that is triggered by a pre-agreed parameter, a climate parameter that can be triggered. If it's triggered, then the insurance payout comes through no matter what. There's no process like with car insurance or home insurance where you have to go and actually evaluate the damage. Am I correct?
You're totally right. But it's really, really different than regular insurance, and how does it improve durability? Maybe that's one point to make in this, right? Is that, you know, in normal financing schemes, you can't really get a $100 million loan unless you have insurance. But insurers are not really willing to insure nature in that traditional way. In fact, historically, you know, you can't insure a tree. You can't, which sucks. But you can now with parametric insurance. And the reason why is because, you know, like think about, you know, there's a flood and, you know, or a fire, and you see this a lot in some of the fire damaged areas too. Like some of the houses burn and some of them don't. And the insurance triggers for the houses that have the loss, not the houses that don't. Parametric insurance works very, very differently. If there is that predetermined climate event, like a drought or a hurricane, which are big ones for this coral reef, you know, it triggers for everybody. You don't have to come in as that fisherman and prove that you've had a loss, which is a really challenging thing, right? Like, and we saw this for parametric policies in Africa, some of the first ones that I wrote as well, that we saw that, you know, the farmers couldn't respond to these losses, or they couldn't even put in their insurance claims. But when parametric insurance was there, the insurer knows exactly how much they're going to pay in those losses. It's not this like really variant loss scenario. And then also all the farmers have a very stable sort of income coming in so that they can respond to that loss. And one of the things that happens in those marketplaces then is that those small scale operations begin to diversify.
But I would also like to mention then that the parametric insurance can be used then for two purposes, right? In this case, in the Mesoamerican Reef, we're insuring the coral reef after a hurricane, so you can quickly come in after there's an event and carry out restoration, which will accelerate the recovery of the reef and the environmental services it provides, right? You'll have coral reefs back sooner, fish back sooner. This supports local communities and local fishers. But then there's also, and this is something we hope to pilot very soon, is parametric insurance for individual fishers, like you were talking about, you know, with small-scale agriculture. In this case, and we're working in Honduras in this example, we're working with very, very small-scale fishers. They're not part of the financial system in the country. They're not able to obtain a loan in any way. They should be, right? They should all be part of that financial system. So we have been working with them for the past year and a half, and they have been receiving capacity building on how to open a bank account, how to maintain their accounts on fishing, and how to learn about sustainable fishing practices. And now we want to have them come into the financial system. And to do that, we're very lucky. We work with a funder called the Global Fund for Coral Reefs that is helping us innovate and design these mechanisms. And what we're doing is designing a very specific financial tool, a very specific loan, a concessional loan instrument that will be tied to parametric insurance for the fishers themselves for losses incurred during chronic bad weather days, like when it rains for 7 days, you know, straight, and they cannot go out fishing. So the idea of having the parametric insurance is to de-risk the loan, and they're more willing to enter a loan because they know they can be covered. And hopefully, you know, this will close the loop and they'll be able to be part of the financial system. If this can, you know, be modeled adequately, then other financial institutions in Honduras can possibly pick it up and then carry it on. So this is what we're working on.
So, okay, so that's very cool in terms of how you're pairing this insurance with the loan to help the fishermen. So make the link for me about why making it easier for fishermen to fish is good for the conservation of the reef.
Yes, if fishermen have capital and they have resources, they're able to fish more efficiently, right? They have better boats, they can fix their boats, or they can do a turnover and have a new engine, have better fishing gear. And we are tying those loans to conservation practices, right? So they will be tied, something similar to a conservation agreement, but tied to the loan, so that we know that they comply with the legal, in this case, the Honduran legal fishing practices, or respect of no-take zones, fully protected areas. So we're trying to link that in. But we already did part of that capacity building required to understand why it's important to follow sustainable fishing practice. So now we're tying in all the elements. But fishers that don't have access to capital, if you're desperate for money and for capital, you'll go fishing anywhere. You're close to shore.
You're addressing the linkage between poverty
Yes.
and social justice
Yes.
and conservation in a way that creates a positive cycle for everybody involved.
Exactly. That's what we're trying to do. By having some source of funding, then they're better able to follow these better practices, better fishing practices. Otherwise, you just need to feed your family, right? So you'll go out and do these practices which are not good.
And that must have, you must be addressing the role of women in that cycle because they're so central to household economies and
Yes.
in a fishing, it's not just about fishermen.
No, it's actually the whole value chain, and we're beginning a study on that fisheries value chain and to see where women are, what their role is. In some of the countries in the region, women fish. They actually go out in the boats and they're the ones that fish. But it doesn't happen in the 4 countries. And they're also involved in fixing the nets and doing the marketing and filleting the fish. So they're very, very much involved, but invisibilized. Is that a word? Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But they're invisibilized. So now we're going to do a study to see exactly where they are. We have a budding program focused on women's enterprises, Women for the Mar. And through this program, we want to target specifically women and determine what tools we can use, right? Yes, concessional finance, blended finance, concessional loans, etc. We have a small guarantee fund that can hopefully also, reduce that risk. But we'll see then if things like parametric insurance can also be something that can be used for women's groups in their particular economic activities.
Yeah, that's just so cool. And I think it really reflects a bit of what Stephen was saying, what was said earlier about it's not conservation, it's about life. It's about a living system of people and communities, and all these things actually go together, and they're not separate things. You can't address them separately. That's really beautiful work. I want to turn to you because you have been working on something, a very dorky term called natural asset management. But it's actually quite groundbreaking. I mean, and so I just want you to very quickly explain it, because we've got a little bit of time, and then talk about how that can be quite transformational, also one of the kind of challenges in the way it's being implemented.
Right. Who in this room has heard the term ecosystem service? So many of you.
Talking to the converted.
Yeah,
all right.
Amazing. And then, what about natural capital valuations? A little bit less. Natural asset management in Canada is a new profession. And that is like the Natural Assets Initiative. It's a not-for-profit that I used to work with, and I think is doing quite a lot of thought leadership on creating conditions for natural asset management amongst many municipal governments. But I helped start their Indigenous-led practice of what does natural asset management look like. And it's about inventorying our natural assets. That's what we need to do first before we actually understand ecosystem services. And the difference between ecosystem services and natural capital valuation is putting a value on those ecosystem services, which becomes to be so complicated, right?
And so this is where the sort of transformational thing happens. So you understand you've got a forest and you understand that it's pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, it's preventing drought and flood mitigation, so you don't have to spend a bunch of money on engineering and all these things. That then gets converted into a value on say a municipality's or a province's bottom line spreadsheet. So how does that then actually transform the way they're thinking about preserving, conserving that?
And maybe I'll give you a really good example of where I have seen a great transformation happen, where we did do evaluation at a watershed scale. We did a study at Halton Conservation, the Grindstone Creek watershed. It's in Hamilton. It's also pretty cross-boundary that municipalities like Mississauga, like some of the largest concentration of people live in this watershed in southern Ontario. It also has the largest flood loss. Like, insurers are paying every season, they're paying damages in this watershed. And so we did do evaluation, and we found that every year that watershed provides $2 million of stormwater and flood management services to this entire community. And I try and pick up on what Tony just said on the last, so what? So what? Well, it really helped us set the foundation, those numbers, to then begin to have a conversation with all of the municipal governments that surround that watershed to sort of say, like, well, what are the long-term operating costs that you're putting into this? Now we can actually create an asset management plan for this and begin to pool funds on a watershed scale where they weren't even talking before, none of them. And certainly we're not talking to the Mississaugas or the Credit or the Haudenosaunee, and that also brought those folks to the table. And then once we finally got all of those people around the table, we were then able to have a conversation about creating a common asset trust, which is a little bit different than how we normally see land trusts or some of the other trusts that you might see used in conservation, because everybody's contributing to it. We also begin to sort of say, well, natural infrastructure is a shared piece of infrastructure. It's just like a highway. It's just like a bridge. Like, why do we need to treat it differently? It's providing the same service. But what else began to happen was that insurers began to come to the table. The cooperators, Intact, a number of large insurance companies who are seeing losses every single day, saw those numbers and said, we see a return on investment. But not in the traditional way that we think about return on investment. The way that insurers see return on investment in this situation, and this is like a widely known piece of information from amongst the insurance industry, for every dollar that an insurance company invests into adaptation, they receive $4 back post-loss. So if you're an insurer and you're investing in cultural burning, and then that prevents a bunch of forest fires, well, then that's great for you, insurer. And so you're not seeing those returns on investment as you normally do. You see them in reduced losses. And this is what insurers across the globe, absolutely, they're not going to be in business much longer if we continue moving business as usual. And so it was about a matchmaking game, really. And so we use those numbers not just to have them to help decision making, but to do some matchmaking, because that's what had to happen.
Yeah, and so I just want to put a point on this for everyone in the room, because this is the way in which this is completely transformational. Nature is starting to be valued in its intact form, not just in its extracted and destroyed and used form. And that is, you and other leaders in this field are completely shifting that. Insurance Council of Canada says now the number one way to avoid drought and flood is to maintain habitat in its intact form. And they are, I know in a reef system in Costa Rica,
to protect the reef because it provided so much benefit, they started to charge different hotels and operators in the area different rates based on their impact on the reef. So it started to incentivize everyone to change their practices to steward the reef. So insurance is a huge thing. I want to come back to Stephen because this is another really, you mentioned this concept of nature stewardship credits. And I think most people would be familiar with carbon credits, but this is an evolution on that. And tell me a little bit more about how what you want to do there and what you want to make happen with that financial tool.
Yeah, I think we're talking about scale and impact. And then when we're talking about carbon projects, ecological services, service fees, those are important. They're should be part of the conservation economy. But where they apply is in populated areas like southern Canada, southern Vancouver Island, southern Ontario, and that's where the carbon markets operates too. You know, it's where the carbon is in danger from man and development. Canada's commitment to protecting 30% is a huge responsibility that Canada's taken on. Our commitment, in comparison to other countries, is to other countries that make the same commitments. Our commitment is bigger than those countries, 3 million square kilometers. Now that's a huge commitment. And because of the location, because of the geography, Canada is such an important ecological area. So if we could scale Canada and treat Canada as an ecosystem service for the global community, we could introduce create markets such as nature stewardship, which is the nature stewardship credit is the management of 1 hectare of land where biodiversity, socioeconomic impact, and the governance of that are the valuation systems. So, you know, in Canada, to protect 3 million square kilometers, we don't have the tax base to pay for that effectively. We just don't. We're the 2nd largest country in the world, the longest coastline in the world. We have a population of 40 million, a 26 million tax base. And the cost of building 1 kilometer road in this country is probably the most expensive in the world. So the programs and services that's burden the tax base is already huge. And Canada is a resource development exporting country. That's our economy. To ask that tax base to not develop 30% of that economy, and then above that, ask them to use their tax base to pay for the management of that, you're not going to have a receptive audience. So we need to look at areas. You know, we could talk about these things and say, this is good over here, this is good over here, but what are we doing to talk about scaling and impact? You know, places like Northern Canada, that does impact global environment, global weather patterns. Well, we created 26,000 square kilometers of protected area. I'm working with a nation in northern Manitoba that's working on protecting 55,000 square kilometers. Square kilometers, not hectares. Now, these are ecosystems that is going to be an impact. It's going to be a difference maker if managed well against climate change impacts. That's, you know, we should focus on, as a collective, we should focus on these impactful projects as a priority because we don't have much time, folks.
And how do the stewardship credits enable that?
The stewardship credits, if you, to manage 1 hectare of land is 1 credit. And if you're selling 600,000 of those hectares of credits within an area, you could use that money to manage that area, use it to manage biodiversity, use it to manage high concentration of carbon sinks, even though they're not part of the marketplace, but it is part of the values that we've created for ourselves globally as part of our collective answers to climate change and biodiversity loss.
And that kind of credit could be of interest to an insurance company. It could be of interest to a company that's doing other activities either near the area or anywhere in the world, really.
The opportunity now is to measure and understand that. So, you know, as we talk about North America, we're talking about the guys in the middle whose political system is in shambles right now. Let's invest in Canada. Let's invest in Mexico. Let's create impacts in these two jurisdictions and then go to the middle once the political environment there gets better. But we just need to do something. You know, we could talk about little case studies here, little case studies here, but what are we talking about scaling and impacting effectively? You know, and there's, like I said, there's over 500,000 square kilometers of land that's been declared as protected and conserved areas by Indigenous peoples already. That's commitment. That's leadership. That's transformational. Where power is based. Let's invest in that. Let's support them. Let's support public governments to realize that opportunity, those opportunities. And that's the opportunity, and I think that's a responsibility, because we can't be piecemealing this together. We have to be systematic in our thinking and in our approach of how to use nature to how to help nature to be that 1/3 solution, whether it's managing biodiversity or carbon, even though they're not part of the marketplace. And nature stewardship credits, if that takes off and that becomes a product that the world can come together and say, yes, we could support that, because that investment is an investment in my future generations.
Beautiful. We could just talk all day. I could talk about this stuff all day. I want to recognize that when you're talking scale and impact, we talked a lot about the crisis. So the response has to be at scale, and it has to have impact. It has to change the needle. At the same time, it needs to be very real in communities to the fishermen and to the fisherman's family, and you know, in these ways, right? So I love the fact that you guys have kind of covered the local to the national to the international mechanisms. Time is up. Do you want to say any last comment to this crowd to inspire them even further than you guys already have? Just a short little.
Yeah, short little. Yeah, one of the things that I wake up every day and I'm very grateful for is the transformational time that we are in right now. And I think maybe that we can ground ourselves in the fact that for the first time in history, nature is being accounted for in a more holistic way. And I know it's not going fast enough, but when you see pension funds like the Norwegian Wealth Fund revaluing their entire portfolio, BlackRock, huge pension fund, reevaluating their entire portfolio to understand the value of nature. And they have determined, the Norwegian Wealth Fund in particular, has determined that like 90% of their pension fund investments are reliant on nature. And like previous, like PwC, Deloitte, all those big 5 accounting firms, they were like putting some conservative estimates, like 50% or something. No. And so when I hear financial institutions telling me, well, the demand's not there. We don't know how we're going to get the money out the door for these loans and equity investments. It's coming. It's coming. The demand is there. We are the supply. Y'all in this room are the supply. And, you know, when we are doing this reevaluation of our entire economic system, because that's what's happening, one of the things that I always say to audiences like this, we cannot put nature on the balance sheet for the first time in history without also putting reconciliation on the balance sheet. You cannot put nature on balance sheets without Indigenous peoples and benefit sharing agreements with Indigenous peoples. And that is just like point blank my bottom line. You know, money's coming, don't worry. And when it does come, let's do it different.
Beautiful. Do you want to say a last thing?
Just very quickly, I think that given the rapid change in climate and the impacts we're seeing more and more every day, I think we have to be flexible in how we see solutions and take the risk to trial them. They will not all work, but we have to do something. We cannot just sit, with our hands crossed saying it's a terrible situation. We really have to trial them. And I'm very thankful to the donors that are willing to say, okay, we'll trial with you and see what happens. But we have to go out there on a limb and risk those things, like what you're mentioning, for that larger impact. Just get out there and do them. And write it down, what works, what doesn't, and then try to adapt.
Yeah. Take risks, get stuff done. This is an amazing group of people. There's not many people who take risks and do it at scale for large impacts, who have the courage to do that, who have the intelligence and foresight and fortitude to do that. Because it takes, you get pushback when you take risks all the time. So I want to just ask you to join me in thanking these people not only for this panel, but for the incredible work that they are doing to make profound changes in the world that we live in. Thank you, guys. Great panel. Stephen.
We rise together. We rise out of this together.